I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, in the first of a two-part interview with dairy specialist Padraig O'Connor, I get his top tips for a good milking routine, covering everything from teat preparation to the effective use of a backing gate to avoiding repetitive strain injury. And I first asked Padraig why a good milking routine is so important.
There are a number of reasons, Emma-Louise, why a good milking routine is important. And I suppose the first one is, to produce quality milk. The second reason is to ensure that the milkings are carried out in a safe manner for both the milker and the cow. So in other words, keeping it as stress-free as possible for both cows and milkers. And I suppose the third thing is to ensure that the milkings are carried out in an efficient manner as well.
In terms of a quality product that you mentioned, Padraig, what are the key steps farmers should take to ensure that milk is of high quality?
I suppose the first one is it's a given, that the milking machine is in proper working order. That's really a given, and that the milking machine is well maintained as well. I suppose from a milker's point of view, how the milker conducts themselves in terms of the milking attire that they're wearing. So in other words, the milkers need to be wearing a clean apron or parlour suit. I suppose the other thing is that they should be wearing nitrile disposable gloves. And I suppose it's also important, to keep those gloves clean and disinfected throughout the milking as well. These disposable nitrile gloves, they're not self-disinfecting. So it's really important, that the milkers keep themselves clean. I suppose the other point is that in relation to the cows, the cleaner the cows come into the parlour, certainly the easier it is to milk them, and it's easier to produce quality milk as a result. And I suppose just in terms of, clean cows, how do you keep them clean? I suppose well-maintained roadways, especially around the entry and exit to the parlour, it's really important. I suppose the other thing is well-maintained gapways. Sometimes because of the fact with bigger numbers, going to a smaller area, they can get fairly mucked up. So it's just to, maintain those gapways as well. I suppose the other area that I would see around some farms is that maybe around the water troughs can get very mucky, particularly maybe if the water tank has leaked since the last grazing. I suppose the other one is, it's a big one, it's maybe clipping cows' tails 3 to 4 times a year. And certainly, that will keep the cows cleaner. It will keep the udders cleaner as well. And I suppose the last point there is, if you're milking cows out of the shed, keeping the cubicles clean as well.
So just to pick up on a few points there, Padraig, when you say that keeping the milking machine in working order and well maintained, how often would you advise farmers to get their milking machine serviced?
Well, certainly at least once a year. So what a lot of farmers are doing at the moment is that have one major service and maybe one minor service. So you're talking about major service once a year and then a minor service maybe every 6 months as well. So that's critical. That's the most important milking machine on a dairy farm. It's working twice a day, roughly for maybe in a spring calving situation, 300 days of the year. So it's really, really important to keep that milking machine serviced.
And then in terms, moving on then to the clothing, and when you talk about keeping gloves clean throughout the milking, I suppose in practical terms, you're just talking about maybe teat spraying the gloves where they've gotten dirty and potentially picked up some bacteria.
Absolutely, yes. Just keeping the gloves clean and disinfected, particularly, if, for example, you come across a cow with mastitis, clinical mastitis, it's really, really important in that particular case, to wash that off and disinfect them before you move on to the next cow. I would always say that the milker is a conduit between the cows and the milking machine. So it's really, really important. The milker has a big responsibility in terms of, producing that quality milk, keeping the transfer of bacteria from one cow to the other to a minimum.
And I guess in terms of keeping cows clean, I think you've given us some really good practical examples there in terms of keeping the roadways clean, looking at, I suppose, the infrastructure in terms of gaps and water troughs, and also, around the cow, keeping the tails clean. If we move on then, Padraig, and look at a poor milking routine, is that reflected in the milk in any way? Are there any indicators or metrics that we can look at in milk that would suggest there's a poor routine on farm?
Yeah, I suppose there are a number of quality tests that the processors will actually do on or to test milk. And I suppose, the first one is somatic cell count, SCC, and that indicates the level of mastitis in the herd. The second one is total bacterial count, which is TBC, and I suppose that indicates the level of cleanliness of the plant itself, and also the level of cleanliness or hygiene in terms of the milker. And I suppose another important one there is thermoduric count, or thermoduric bacteria.
And I suppose the somatic cell count can be a reflection of, what's happening with the cow. What sort of control can farmers have over the SCC, the TBC and the TCM?
Yeah, well, I suppose in relation to SCC, I suppose this is where milk recording really it plays a key role. And I suppose what the milk recording will do is it will pick up cows with high levels of SCC or somatic cell count. And I suppose it's important that if those are into the herd, that the clusters are actually disinfected before you move on to the next cow. And I suppose milk recording will identify those particular cows. Otherwise, you'll have transfer of the bacteria that's causing that somatic cell count from one cow, from the infected cow to the uninfected cow. So it's really key, that the clusters are disinfected before you move on to the next cow. It could be maybe 4 or 5 in 100, for example. Do you know what I mean?
And I suppose just to pick up on that, Padraig, have you any guidelines for best practice where you have cows with mastitis in the herd? What is the best way of dealing with them? Say, for argument's sake, you were treating 3 cows during the morning milking. How would you recommend people go about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Emma-Louise. I suppose, basically, I would always advocate that, dealing with mastitis cows should be really done at the end of milking, and milk, last, if at all practically possible, I suppose. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that you're eliminating that cross-contamination from the infected cow to the uninfected cow. And I suppose the second reason is that you have time to deal with that particular cow at the end of milking. You can give her sufficient time in terms of, tubing her, in terms of disinfecting the teeth before you put up the tube and so on. So I think it makes it easier for the milker, as well, because they have more time maybe to devote to that particular cow with the mastitis.
If we turn our attention to the physical practice of milking, Padraig, do the number of cows per row, or the number of cows per milker, or the number of rows milked during a milking event, does that affect the quality of the milking routine?
I suppose the routine in a bigger parlour as opposed to a medium-sized parlour, the principles remain the same really. I suppose, however, the difference would be maybe in terms of if you have 2 operators in a pit as opposed to 1. I suppose what you really have to do there is you're talking about maybe the first milker starts cupping or putting on the clusters onto the first 5 cows. Milker number 2 attaches the clusters to the second 5 cows, and so on and so forth. And the reason for that is that in bigger parlours, there's a significant amount of time taken up with loading and unloading the row of the parlour. Okay, so if the operators actually start cupping as soon as the first 5 cows are in, it cuts down on what we call milker idle time. So you're getting those clusters working as soon as possible as the cows come in.
So say for argument's sake, yourself and myself were milking in a 40-unit parlour, Padraig. You wouldn't take the first 20 and I wouldn't take, and me the second 20. You'd rotate in fives.
Yeah, well, you could divide the parlour up into two, Emma-Louise, but the issue there is that it's inefficient, and clusters are actually hanging up, whereas they could be on the cows. So if you operate a system whereby I will take the first 5 cows, I'll put the clusters on those 5. You'll address the second 5 cows, put the clusters on those 5, and so on and so forth. It's called bunny hopping, as they refer to it in New Zealand. So you're actually, and when you're doing that, you're actually spraying the cows you're taking the clusters off of as well. So when you get to the end of the parlour, you can actually, maybe 3/4 way down the pit, you can open the gate that you're taking of the road that you're taking the clusters off. So as again, the milkers are working, and the cows are working as well. So you're being efficient.
And then, I suppose, a follow-up question there, Padraig. We see there's an awful lot of expansion has occurred on dairy farms across the country, and there's a lot of farmers in the situation where, expansion has happened, but the facilities haven't caught up just yet. And there are some farmers who are milking, 15, 16, 17 rows of cows. Is there an effect on cows there where we're seeing, bigger numbers of rows than we would have seen in the past on farms? I suppose, is there effect on the human and the cows?
Yeah, you're 100% right, Emma-Louise. One is the effect it has on the operator. And I suppose, we have a target in Teagasc that anything longer, if an operator has to spend any longer than 1.5 hours in the pit, fatigue sets in. I suppose that's the first point of view. The second point is that in relation to the animals themselves, they're standing in the collecting yard for much, much longer. They're hemmed up. That will affect their production. It will also have an impact on the lameness, because they're standing on concrete for much, much longer. So it affects their feet, and also it'll affect production because of the fact they're hemmed into a collecting yard, as opposed to they could be out in the field if you had a smaller parlour.
And
if you had a bigger parlour.
And that 1.5 hours that you're referring to, that's per milking, is it, Padraig?
That's per milking, yes.
Yeah, super. And then looking at standard operating procedures, this is something that I suppose is becoming more and more popular and more talked about, or I suppose SOPs for short. You've been to a lot of farms at this stage. Do you see SOPs on many farms on your travels?
They're beginning to take hold, Emma-Louise, at this stage now. So yes, there is an improvement there, but I think we have a way to go yet. And I suppose what I have seen some of the farmers that are at it for a while is, I suppose I would say to farmers, start off with a very simple number of points in relation to how maybe to start the milking machine, how to do the milking, how to wash the milking machine, break it up into small little stages like that. And as time goes on, you can actually improve it. I suppose the other thing is that what some farmers are actually doing now is they're actually, putting photographs alongside the points, which is really helpful in terms of maybe somebody coming in that doesn't know the milking parlour that well. And I suppose as a further step, what some farmers are actually doing now is they're actually creating maybe a short little video, of an SOP and putting it up on maybe, for example, a WhatsApp group. So maybe if there's a number of employees on that they can, that some of the younger generation seem to find that very helpful as well.
And I guess, if we consider the average farmer in the country, they're milking probably 80 cows. So, in those circumstances, the farmer is the owner-operator by and large, and they do the majority of milkings. I think a simple SOP with photographs or indeed a video would be a really, really good help where, say a relief milker would come in and they mightn't necessarily be used to the parlour and be milking on a regular basis. And, when you talk about a good milking routine, that would be a way of ensuring the milking routine. I suppose to recap, for any SOP that a farmer will create, simple points and as you say, something graphic like a photo or a video will make it clearer also.
Absolutely, yeah. And maybe to further that on a little bit more, Emma-Louise, you know, if you have it laminated so that if it gets wet, it doesn't damage it. And it, you know, try to have it beside the workstation as well, so as, you know, the person that's coming in can refer back to it as well. You know what I mean? So it's much easier on the farm owner as well. If they have it down in points, they won't be getting the phone calls to say, well, you know, I'm having difficulty here with this. What do I do? You know, so it makes it both easier on the employer and the person that's coming in to do the milking as well.
And that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to Padraig O'Connor for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.